good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, thank you for joining us. We are talking politics with me, Dr. Brian Baker, and I just want to take a moment to talk about the pillars of democracy and some things that we've seen in recent years that may be negatively impacting these pillars. What's going on in the United States? What are some decisions that have been made recently that I think that we really need to pay close attention to as voters, as constituents, as citizens? What are we seeing and how are we being impacted by these decisions? So if you do a little search on the web, you'll find the four pillars of democracy. I think it's really a good starting point for us to kick off this discussion. You look at these four principles that really guide a free and open society. We're looking at number one, justice. Number two, representation. Number three, freedoms. And number four, equity. Okay. Justice, as we have some definitions here, an independent legal system that treats all individuals equally, ensuring that no one, not even the government, is above the law. Representation, regular, transparent, and fair elections that allow citizens to choose their leaders and hold them accountable. Number three, freedoms, guaranteed human rights, including freedom of speech, religion, and assembly, which empowers citizens to express themselves freely. And number four, equity, the promise that every individual is provided the same fundamental opportunities to succeed and is treated fairly regardless of background. And I really want to underline and highlight that point. The same fundamental opportunities to succeed. That's what equity really is, right? I'm not saying that it's a guarantee, but we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to succeed and that it is the same and people are treated fairly regardless of their background. Now, for sake of this discussion, I want to really hone in on the justice piece when we're looking at the legal system. You hear these terms that we believe in the rule of law. Now, the question is, who are making decisions when it comes to cases that come before them? When you look at any level of the court system, whether it be the Supreme Court, the federal court, you're talking about the Court of Appeals. So just to give you a quick rundown, you're talking about the Supreme Court, highest court in the land. Then you have, say, like federal appeals courts, and then you have federal district courts. And then if you get into the state level, it's very similar as well. But for the sake of the time that we have right now, I really want to focus on the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and some decisions or a decision that was made in the past 2 years, going back to 2024. So we have back in 2024, I want to go here. It was a case, Trump v. the United States, and if you go to the Supreme Court's website, you can actually find it there at www.supremecourt.gov, and they'll have the opinions for Trump v. United States. It was argued on April, so for those who may not know, it was argued on April 25th, 2024, and it was decided on July 1st, 2024, okay, which is actually pretty quick when you think about it. So it was argued prior to the presidential election in 2024, and we have to just look at, well, what was going on, all right? So a federal grand jury, and I'm actually reading straight from the document that's provided on the website, where a federal grand jury was indicted former President Donald J. Trump on 4 counts of conduct that occurred during his presidency following the November 2020 election. The indictment alleged that after losing that election, Trump conspired to overturn it by spreading knowingly false claims of election fraud, to obstruct the collecting, counting, and certifying of the election results. Okay, Trump moved to dismiss the indictment based on presidential immunity, arguing that a president has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions performed within the outer perimeter of his official responsibilities, and that the indictment's allegations fell within the core of his official duties. Okay. So now the district court denied Trump's motion to dismiss, holding that former presidents do not possess federal criminal immunity for any acts. The D.C. Circuit affirmed. Both the district court and the D.C. Circuit declined to decide whether the indictment conduct involve official acts. Okay, so we have that going on. Now, when we get to the ruling, if you scroll all the way down to page 14, you'll see here there's some interesting things that the court comes to in its conclusion. The Supreme Court, the majority decision was 6-3, and they said on page 14 of this here, we conclude that under our constitutional structure of separated powers, the nature of presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. As for his remaining official acts, he is also entitled to immunity. At the current stage of proceedings, in this case, however, we need not and do not decide whether that immunity must be absolute or instead whether a presumptive immunity is sufficient. So the court is saying, the majority is saying, okay, we conclude that the nature of presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure, at least with respect to the president's exercise of his core constitutional powers. This immunity must be absolute. Now, the question comes up, why? Why would it be absolute immunity? So we're going to give the president, now keep in mind, context matters. At the time that this decision comes out, President Joe Biden is still the president. Okay. The election doesn't take place until November 2024. Donald J. Trump isn't sworn into office until January of 2025. Okay, January 20th, 2025. So we're not talking about this here when we're looking at, okay, it's immunity, absolute immunity for the president. Well, at that time, President Biden had the ability after this decision to do a lot of stuff, a lot of things. Because once you have absolute immunity, then you can start doing all types of things that could potentially be corrupt. Could be. And now the court is essentially putting in the hands of every president that comes afterward. Well, we're hoping that the president is of good moral character and is going to do the right thing. But is that necessarily going to be the case for everyone? As you may have heard this phrase, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that is true. When we look at this, what the Supreme Court is saying is, okay, yeah, the president's different from everyone else. The president should have absolute immunity. And my question is always going to be, why? Why does the president get absolute immunity? No one else gets absolute immunity. If you and I go out and we commit a crime, we're not going to be like, okay, well, I guess since we committed this crime, we shouldn't be punished for it. No. The legal system is designed for everyone who is committing crimes, committing illegal acts, that they can be arrested, prosecuted, and they can be found guilty by a jury of their peers. And any criminal prosecution, they can be held accountable. And if necessary, they may be going to prison, have restitution, whatever it may be, depending on the situation. But what we know for certain that if any of us as voters are committing crimes, whether they be big or small, we're not getting immunity just because of the position that we hold. That should never be the case. So as we think about this, when we look at these pillars of democracy, again, this legal system that treats all individuals equally, ensuring that no one is above the law. When you grant the power of absolute immunity to the president, you have now placed the president in a position where he or she has the power to do whatever they want to do and then say, well, it's an official act. What the problem with that is that we're now hoping that the morality of the individual holding the office of the president, that they're going to actually be upstanding people, that they're going to have good moral character, that they will do the right thing. And I don't know of many examples in history where people who had absolute power to do whatever they wanted to do actually had good moral character. I just have a hard time finding some good examples. The reason why we have separation of powers, separation of power, so that you have the executive branch, the legislative branch, and then you have the judicial branch, is so that no one person or group of people can just run roughshod and do whatever they want to do, however they want to do it, and there's no accountability. Because the moment that you give someone absolute immunity, meaning that they have this ability to essentially do whatever they want to do and they're not going to be prosecuted for it, now you have opened the door to corruption. You have opened the door to these things happening down the line where, okay, well, I guess that's just what it is. And when voters see that, it becomes a problem. You start to erode the trust that people have in the rule of law. People begin to get angry and upset about the fact that, wait a minute, why is it that this person gets to do whatever they want to do? I don't get that. And now you have an inequity that's also taking place. And the inequity is, wait a minute, I'm not getting that. I don't have the same opportunity to do it that way. We have to be mindful of what happens with these decisions. Now, the Supreme Court in this 6-3 ruling essentially is saying, okay, yes, we're going to go ahead and give you this immunity. We're going to say, yes, this is what it is. And I encourage you, I really do encourage you to go back and read what they actually wrote, what their opinion was, what was the majority decision. And so now we have on the books as of, as of 2024, make sure I give you the correct date again, as of, it was decided on July 1st, 2024, right? That the president has this, essentially this above the law ruling where they just can do whatever they want to do. And if it's an official act, then that's what it is, according to the Supreme Court. But the question is for us, because we don't just have to accept that this is what the Supreme Court says and we just have to live with it. The question is, what do the other branches of government, what does the legislative branch have to say about that? Because you can write legislation to say, no, we're not having that. We're not giving absolute immunity to the president. Not only that, but we also can say as voters, no, we're not doing that. This isn't about political affiliations. This isn't about party. This is about us saying we're not okay with this. We're not okay with this for the president, no more than we would be okay with this for any other person in this country. If you are breaking the law, then you should be arrested, prosecuted, and if you're convicted, held accountable by a jury of your peers, and whatever those consequences are, that's what they are. But what we should never do is say, yes, we're going to give someone, anyone, absolute immunity to do whatever it is that they're going to do while holding office, because you've now created a monster. You created a monster where now you're hoping that this individual is going to do the right thing, but they always have the potential of not doing the right thing in some capacity. And to avoid that problem, we have to have the foresight, the foreknowledge to say, you know what, this could potentially go off the rails. In fact, I would argue that the founding fathers of the country had already written into the Constitution, had already decided we don't want to go back to having some type of monarchy. So that's why we're going to have this separation of powers, so that one person doesn't just get to do whatever they want to do and they're not held accountable. We don't want that. Is that what we want as a country, as a society, where the president gets to do whatever he or she wants to do whenever they want to do it? Take away the party for a second, who it is, whether it be Democrat, Republican, Independent. Do you want anyone having absolute immunity in the office of the President of the United States? How does that work? How does that even make it even to the point where you're like, yeah, that's a good idea long term? It might work for an individual or two in the short term, but if that person or people don't have good moral character or are going to abuse the office of the presidency, how does that affect the rest of us in the country and our reputation as a nation? Those are the things that we have to ask ourselves moving forward. What do we want to do to change this situation, to change how this decision could potentially have rippling effects for generations if we don't do something about it? Is this the path forward that we want for anyone holding the office of president? That's a question that we have to come to terms with. And if we want to do something about it, what are we going to do about it? And when are we going to do something about it? Okay, so please go back and review that Supreme Court decision. I think that is going to be very helpful for us as we move forward, looking at things, going back and reading what decisions have been made and being knowledgeable about what is happening in our society, because these decisions have a huge impact on what people can potentially do when they hold the office of president, for example, and how they use that tremendous power. And we really got to think about, are they the type of people that we want holding power, number one, and number two, do they have the moral character that is necessary to do what's best for the country? And if there's ever a question about that, we certainly don't want them to have absolute immunity from any type of criminal prosecution. So please go back and read that. Go back and read that. I look forward to us really diving into some more things as we move forward. Again, we are going to dive into everything that we can to make sure that we are knowledgeable, that we are constituents that understand what's happening in our democracy.